Welcome to Lindamood-Bell Radio. I'm Dave Hungerford for Lindamood-Bell. Did you know that Lindamood-Bell for Schools helps educators raise achievement in reading, comprehension, and math? Get started by taking a Lindamood-Bell teacher workshop. You can learn the steps of our founder's unique, evidence-based programs, including visualizing and verbalizing for comprehension, seeing stars for reading, spelling, and fluency, and LIPS, Lindamood phoneme sequencing. Visit our website for the current schedule and sign up today, lindamoodbell.com. Here's today's episode.
Great. Well, thank you for joining me today. I'm with Dr. Patrick Sayne, who is retired of the Paso Robles Unified School District and is currently a consultant to the San Luis Obispo County Department of Education. Pat, nice to have you here today.
I'm glad to be here.
Pat, I've known you for quite a while, and truth be told, I worked with your wife at Lindamood-Bell a few years ago. But you've had, I think, kind of an interesting journey to get to be a school district superintendent. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about that path that you took?
Well, I was teaching vice principal in Orange County, and I saw a small rural school district was looking for a superintendent principal, and I applied, and I got it. It was the Warner Union School District, way out in the middle of nowhere in San Diego County. And I always felt the reason I got it is I was at the time a reserve Navy lieutenant, intelligence officer, and 3 of the board members were retired Navy officers. So I think it had more to do with that than it did any academic thing I might have had.
Interesting. And how long ago was that you had your first?
It was 1978. So I predated Proposition 13 and also collective bargaining for teachers. And I went from there to the Valle Lindo School District in South El Monte, and I was there for 11 years when I got my doctorate at USC, and then I moved to Lakeport Unified, all as superintendent, and then I finished my career up in Paso Robles from 1998 to 2008.
So you must have seen a lot of institutional change over the course of your career. What maybe, I know a lot of our listeners are in education and teachers and other professionals. What is the relationship that a superintendent has instructionally with you're far removed from the classroom typically, obviously, but what's the instructional relationship you have with your staff?
It depends on the size of the district. If you're talking anything over 10,000, probably not very much. All of my districts, the largest one I had was Paso, it was 8,000. And but going back to Warner Union, I was in the classrooms all the time working with the teachers because I was also the principal as well as the superintendent. In Valle Lindo, the same way, it wasn't a big district, 1,300. And the same in Lakeport. When I got to Paso, I had, for the first time, an assistant superintendent of curriculum and instruction. But basically, I was still involved because that was my interest in curriculum, including I made a point to substitute at least once or twice a month just to get the feel for what was going on instructionally.
And we can just narrow down to Paso now, but what were some of the major challenges you faced early in your tenure there?
Well, when I got there, I didn't see a unified curriculum in reading, for one thing. When I asked the assistant superintendent what the reading program was, he said it was eclectic. And so they didn't have a series. They didn't have basically a philosophy. Each of the schools were on their own for teaching reading. I didn't feel that was a good way to go. So we did get a unified reading instruction program. And then at the time, we were also fighting the math wars over, what math to use, new math, old math. I had the engineers against the math specialists at the colleges all fighting with each other. So those were the 2 things that we addressed right away. And of course, special education is always in the background, the challenge of meeting the needs of that population within the budgetary constraints the school districts have.
How have you seen that? That's a good topic. How have you seen that change given the the growth of the legal kind of, not a culture, but more of almost a cottage industry of lawyers that are working with parents to fight so hard against the school districts?
Well, it doesn't have to be an adversarial relationship, and not all attorneys are adversarial. I mean, some of them are, but then again, there's always two sides to a story. So when a school district attempts to do less than they should legally, that's what causes that kind of thing. And on the other hand, you have attorneys that promise more than the law requires to be done. So, it's always a balance. I've never seen a school district that didn't want to do what's best for kids, but the problem becomes one of budgetary constraints, because obviously the federal government passed the law, the American with Disabilities Act. They funded 10% of it.
Yeah, and so that burden then falls on the states or the local districts to make up that.
Yeah, well, the state gives some money, but the local school districts had to continue to spend a proportional amount of their budgets in special education as they did when the act was passed. So, and then the expansion of what was considered part of special education and so forth, that created some issues for school districts. But once again, you try and work through those things without getting in a confrontational process with the parents. And on the other hand, certainly all of us understood a parent with a kid with learning disabilities wanting the best for that kid. So, sometimes though, there were things that we couldn't fix. We just couldn't make them go away.
I know during your tenure here, you had many other issues. I think you had a school or two built. Lots of things you had to engage the community. What was your MO for that engagement? For
getting a bond passed?
Yeah.
Well, they tried to get me to do it when I first came there, and I didn't know enough about the community. I tried the board, and I tried to tell them we don't want to do this now, but they didn't listen, so that failed. But finally, and it took 3 tries, and it took, when the law changed from a 2/3 to a 55% for a school bond. But basically it was engaging at the grassroots level. Parents at each school, what we did was we had parent captains at each school, like the room mothers at an elementary school, that would call all the parents and say, hey, we need you out there voting for this bond. And we finally got it passed. But we also had the issue of the earthquake, the San Simeon earthquake in 2003, which destroyed Flamson, that had been there since 1921.
It's one of our 2 middle schools.
Yeah, and we had a 3-year-long battle with FEMA to actually get it replaced, and we did. It took the help of our congressman and his chief of staff and his local representative Mike Whiteford to get it through. We did. And
we had students in portable classrooms for those 3 years.
Yes, we did.
Kids were part of that.
In fact, it was longer than that. We didn't get the school built in 2008. So until 2008, the earthquake was in 2003. So we were in temporary structures for like 5 years.
What would you consider one of your greatest achievements?
I think getting that school built with federal money was one, but also just we tried to. As a superintendent, I tried to focus on learning. You can get off into the political world or doing other things, but what I was really concerned about, and I set up a program where we reported back our progress on at the time we had standardized tests, our progress on the test scores, and also we used the test scores as a normative rather than a summative thing, so that we could look at where our curriculum was not doing its job and go back and reteach it. I'm not a fan of testing for the sake of testing. It's like saying, the score at the end of 4 innings is such and such. I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested in is what we did well and what we didn't do well.
And the rise of standardized testing certainly took place over your tenure in your schools too.
Yeah, we did it, but I used to tell them that the data without action was a waste of time.
Indeed. And so you also saw, you mentioned the math wars, but there's also the literacy wars were taking place. Tell me about the kind of the changes you saw in literacy over there.
Well, as I alluded to before, the fact that there was no unified reading series, that bothered me. And then I've never been a fan of one particular way of approaching reading, because as you know, there's different kids learn in different ways. Some are visual, some are auditory. Lindamood-Bell's the expert on that sort of thing, and so we wanted to go see phonics. We wanted to see other ways to approach kids, because one of the problems we've always had in terms of teaching reading or all the rest of this, that teachers basically profited from the system. They understood, they learned to read, okay, and they learned to do mathematics. And so if you have a kid who, for whatever reason, doesn't have good visual memory, doesn't have auditory memory, whatever, they don't understand why those kids aren't learning. So you have to have somebody who appreciates different approaches to teaching people. Well, I know from my experience, and I went to Cal State Long Beach in the 60s, right? I don't think my preparation for teaching reading was adequate at all. Basically, how I learned to teach reading was figuring out what wasn't working. And there has to be more concentration on the science of it. And furthermore, one of the things is I don't think we've done enough in terms of having teachers understand the different intelligences. Gardner's 7 intelligences. I don't think everybody understands that the school, the intelligence that allows you to succeed in school is not the only intelligence that there are, and you need to teach to those various modalities in order for kids to learn. I mean, we've got our kinesthetic kids who we used to call the gearheads, who can take an engine apart and put it back together, and they don't need to read anything. So,
well, but now that cars are so heavily computerized, maybe they're going to have to.
Yeah, that changed too.
We have, many of the school districts that you're, I'm sure, in charge of. I know for sure in Paso have a large percentage of students whose families don't speak English at home.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that difference?
Well, one of the things and Paso had a dual immersion program, which the idea was if you mix English only speaking kids with Spanish speaking kids, and you teach them in both language, eventually the English only kids will help the Spanish speaking kids. That's worked to a limited extent. Okay, it hasn't hurt anything, but the problem with that was an assumption that I think is a wrong assumption. Is that the problem that the kids and the Latino kids were having was only language? It was not. Okay. The idea was if you teach them in Spanish and English, eventually, like by the 6th or 7th grade, everything will be fine. I think that's based on a false premise, because a lot of those kids haven't had the background that, say, a middle-class English-speaking kid has had in terms of being read to, the experience level, the verbal level, and all the rest of that stuff. I pointed out to people that if language were the only problem and not poverty and socioeconomic status and all the rest, then why do we have Title I in West Virginia or in South Central Los Angeles? Both places they speak English. So, I mean, I'm not against the dual immersion program. I think it's a great program and it's benefited both English and Spanish speaking kids. But the challenge is making up for the issues of lack of preschool or parents who honestly have to work a lot and don't have the time or the resources to devote to those kinds of things that other parents do. I mean, it's just it's a cycle that we have to break, but it's not easily done, and dual immersion is not the only answer to it.
Right. They've talked about the summer slump and now learning loss for a long time, but the lack of exposure to experiences and just reading and And literature is a big effect on kids. Which kind of brings me to another topic. I think we're maybe in semi-retirement, but the past couple of years, we've had just a dramatic shift and learning loss. What was your experience like with the pandemic?
I think that's probably going to stand out in future years as one of the most harmful things that has been done to education in quite a long time. We're seeing the effects with kids. I've been working at the Paso Robles School District with both the high school and the middle school, and I've been filling in terms of student supervision and also sitting in on IEPs as the administrator. And what we found, our kids haven't been to school in 2 years and they don't know what to do. I mean, we have high school sophomores who were never freshmen. So it's been a, and they were freshmen, but they weren't in school being freshmen. And we have 8th graders who the last time they were in school was in 6th grade. So the kinds of behaviors that they learn over time are missing. Not to mention the fact is they weren't really required. It wasn't the same system. So if a kid wanted to look at his cell phone during Zoom class, he could. So now we have a bunch of kids who are basically addicted to their cell phones, and we've had a hard time bringing them back to, hey, when you're in class, you got to pay attention to the teacher, and you can't just go off and text your friends. So, and it's coming along, but I don't know how you make up for that 2 years.
Yeah, there's so many social, events. My youngest is junior in college now, and he missed, his freshman and sophomore year. Basically, he was pulled up in his room, working online. Most of the classes were not live; they were watching videotapes of past lectures, and did not get much of a college experience there.
Well, it was also a heck of a thing we asked teachers to do. All of a sudden, we're halfway through the second semester of the school year, and we say, we're shutting it down, and all you teachers go online and teach. Huh? Yeah. I mean, really? There was no preparation for that, and you've got teachers from very technologically sophisticated to, I don't even know where to turn the computer on. So obviously it was going to take time. And that's not the teacher's fault, and it's also not the administrator's fault. It was like nobody ever thought that would happen.
I talked to administrators that had to set up Wi-Fi so the parents could come with their kids and sit in the parking lot and do their homework.
Right. And obviously you've seen that effect on our socioeconomically challenged families who don't have Wi-Fi and computers. We had kids in Paso that were trying to do their lessons on a cell phone.
Do you think there's anything positive that can come out of this?
Oh, I think it's provided some ideas about teaching that allow the use of more technology. Okay, I mean, I'm in classrooms and I see them doing stuff now that I never thought of doing. Or if my grandkids were doing things where the teacher would say, okay, we're studying Yellowstone now, click here, and here's Yellowstone in real time. That's a good thing. So, I mean, there's positive to it.
And what would you advice be for somebody that's maybe wanting to move up the admin administrator's ladder at this time?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we're having a difficult time keeping administrators just because of I'm hopeful that the culture war we just fought over mask or not mask or vaccine or not vaccine, and now we've got the critical race theory debate going on and all the rest of that stuff can settle down, because administrators and teachers too, felt like they're targets of a political hassle that has nothing to do with them.
And the discourse has not been exactly polite in many cases.
No, it has not. I mean, it's been brought in for reasons far outside. I mean, we've had the gay rights and all the other things. And obviously, we don't want kids, whatever their sexual orientation or feelings, come to school and be bullied. In my 30, 40 years of being involved in education, I noticed that there was a tendency in society to place a lot of responsibility on schools that maybe they shouldn't have. You know, we became social agencies where, and obviously you can't have hungry kids, so now we feed everybody. And so the role of schools expanded to such a point that it made multiple challenges.
And maybe that'll be something else that comes out of it. Maybe things will become more specialized. Especially the use of technology. I see that as a real positive in terms of helping. I mean, if you have what we used to call, the basic 100 U.S. history class, why shouldn't you have the best professor in the country teaching U.S. history and having the teachers guiding seminars rather than trying to everybody replicate, what out of a textbook? I think that would be a real positive thing. It wouldn't be less teachers, but it would certainly change the way that they do their jobs. I have a daughter that actually works for a research company. And her job is to evaluate instructional programs. It's the federal program, and when they buy these instructional programs, then they want to see, is the program valid? Because we look for changes. Mm-hmm. And I just sent her an article that was, I think it was maybe EdSource, and I forget what the program it was, but it was one elementary school had completely changed their reading program, and they were seeing results. And I sent it to my daughter. I said, is this a real change, or is it a Hawthorne effect? Meaning, the old study that no matter what you did, if you made a change, any change, it made a difference for a while. So, but I think the bottom line on it, I really think that all of the instruction, at least, especially in reading and math, ought to be research-based. We used to do things, they say, well, this should work. and that was the extent of the research. The basis of scientific research is can the study be replicated? Now, if you have something that's been replicated 3 times, you can sort of feel that might be a valid system. And I'm familiar with Lindamood-Bell, and I know that the Lindamood-Bell system works for a certain population. It's an excellent tool. Well, thanks, Pat.
All right. Well, have a good rest of the day. I'm going to let that barking dog in.
And thank you for listening. Learn more about us at lindamoodbell.com. You can also find us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We are Lindamood-Bell.